Okay, everybody, we are going to do something kind of interesting. We've got a pile of NPCs just wandering around this Coliseum here, and we've got John Wick. Now, I'm a big fan of the John Wick franchise. 1 and 2 is pretty good. 3 and 4, a little iffy. 4 being absolutely bonkers with him being invincible. But I wanted to recreate the scene in John Wick 2 where he walks up to Winston and says, "Why am I alive?" And Winston says, "I deem it so." And when that happens, the guy on the phone makes everybody stop. And then like 10 seconds later, something like that, they all start back up again and all the crowd sounds start. And I think that's kind of a neat little thing to reenact here. Controlling NPCs, if we do it again, we go up to them again and we start that cinematic. If I walk around a little bit, you can see the NPCs also follow me with their gaze. So we're going to keep focus on the main player and make them stop and start, and also control the audio, that crowd sound going on. So that's pretty cool. All right, let's get into how we can build this. All right, we're in UEFN, and I thought I would just go over the devices as I usually do in these tutorials on everything that I used to make this happen. First, we've got this big, huge Coliseum because why not? It's perfect for the situation, the scene that we need to set up. Just a prefab, which you can find inside of the content browser. If you go to Fortnite here, and then you go down to prefabs, inside of here are all the prefabs that Fortnite has released that you can use in your games. So I'm using the Coliseum. We've got our device here that is going to run this game, how it runs, everything it does. We've got a cinematic camera because we need to be able to do that cinematic where it sort of cranes up and you see the crowd and the fountain and all that stuff. We've got our player spawners, which every game needs. We've got 2 triggers, although I do only use 1. I wanted to show you how you could use 2 to make things happen. We've got an audio device. This was kind of put in extra because I thought it would be cool if there was extra sounds and then it went quiet, just like in the movie where even the plane sounds stop. It's absolutely ridiculous. Of course, we have John Wick, and of course, he's all banged up like he is in John Wick 2. And of course, the main theme here is controlling NPCs. So we've got all of our NPC spawner devices here. We've got a ton of them, and I've essentially made one and duplicated them all. So we're going to look at how we've set these up and all the verse. Okay, so the NPC spawner device can be found in the devices folder inside of your content browser if you just search up NPC. And it'll be right here. You just drag it in and it will turn into Jones. Now you can use other characters, but we're not going to cover that in this one. I'm going to try to cover that in the next tutorial about NPCs. For now, we're just going to use Jones. Everybody's going to be the same character, which is fine. No big deal. Over in the settings for our NPC, if we look at a default one really quickly, we can see that we've got really nothing in here. The spawn count is 1. We spawn through the walls. Yes. Enable the game start. Yes. Nothing in here for a script behavior. We're going to be doing this part because we want to change how this NPC acts when he's in the game. And then we allow infinite spawn. We're not really doing anything with these guys, so they're not going to infinitely spawn at all. I turned off the timer in mine, but you could have a timer in yours to spawn on 3 seconds or more or less. And then there's other settings here that we're not really using, despawning when they're disabled and stuff like that. It just doesn't matter right now. We don't use any bindings in ours, so we're going to ignore that. Okay, so let's delete this guy. That's what it looks like by default. If we look at the one that we're using here, we have spawn count of 1. He spawns through the walls maybe, if he's too close to a wall. Enable the game start, that's for sure. And this is where we have our script override. And we're able to put in a few items that are going to have an effect on the NPC. They are triggers. So we got a stop and a go trigger, as I showed you earlier, and the rest is pretty much default. So nothing exciting, but we need to talk about how we do this script stuff, because this is what's really important. So to do that, let's head over to Verse and start coding up some stuff. Now, if you're new to Verse and you don't know anything about it, I definitely recommend checking out some of my tutorials on the beginnings. But if you're kind of already into it, then you know that you can go up to Verse and hit Verse Explorer, and then down here your Verse Explorer will open up and you can make files. So we would want to make a new manager for this. So we'll call this, I don't know, John Wick and Winston Manager. Let's call it a manager. I like calling things a manager for my games that are managing a bunch of stuff in my game. So we'll just go ahead and create that. And that's going to be the beginning of our journey on creating devices in the game that are run with Verse. So now, once you've done that, we can double click this When you do that, it's going to open up Visual Basic and we're going to get this basic file that is in here. I've already written all this stuff, so we're going to quickly just copy paste in some things so we can cover what's going on. The first thing I always do is delete all of this basic code that's in here, put in a block, save, and then build. And then I close this and I head over to my content browser to the top folder here. And we called this John Wick and Winston Manager. So we're going to take it and place it in the scene and make it not visible in game, but enable that game start. It's surprising how often you will forget to put your device in your game and try to start it and it just won't work. And you think, why doesn't it work? Forgot to put the device in. So if you do this from the get-go, it's just a good thing to kind of get into a habit of, and now we'll start building it out. All right, so the first thing that we're going to do is set up this device to do some stuff. And the things that we want it to do is respond to when somebody presses the stop trigger, and then we can play a cinematic and play audio. You may not want to do this in yours, but I thought I would cover this anyways because it's kind of fun. It sets up the whole scene. So to do that, we have our stop trigger. It's an editable, so we can set it up in the device to connect to the scene. We have stop trigger, we've called it, and it's a trigger device. Remember, all of these devices can be found in the devices folder. If we go search for trigger in here, we'll see that it shows up right here. Okay, so same for the cinematic sequence. This is what's going to play that cutscene that we see in the game when we hit the trigger, and I've just called it Cine. And then we have one more, which is the crowd audio, which is an audio player device. Audio player devices play wave files. So I've already got a wave file that I brought in. It's just a crowd sound, and that lives right here. Now this audio device is very simple. The only thing that I've really changed is the play location to be the local player instead of registered players or instigating player or the device, because we don't want it to play from the device because it's a crowd. It's all over the place. So we'll just have it play where the local player is, so they just always hear it. And I put in my cue, which is a crowd sound. I've just taken a wave file, converted it to a cue, and put it in here. You could just put the wave file in as well, but I like having cues in mind. And that's it for the audio device. Nothing exciting going on here. For the trigger, it's also very simple. This is enabled at game start and triggered by the player. So when the player steps on it, that's what's going to start things off. Everything else is turned off, or at least default. Okay, so let's set up the onBegin function here. The onBegin runs when the game begins. So when this device starts up and gets instantiated, onBegin will fire. And this is where we want to set up our trigger, what it's going to do when triggered. And we're going to call a function called onStopTrigger. And then we also want to play the crowd audio. So we have to make this function as well. So here are those two functions. We do the play crowd audio function because we want to be able to call this from multiple locations. You could just have this crowd audio.play. The audio device has a play method on it. So you could call it here, but I want to have this to be a little bit more usable across the board. So I've made a function that does this. We pass in whether it's going to be playing or not, which is a logic or Boolean. You can see we passed in true. And if do play equals true, then we will play it. So this is a basic if statement for when you want to do a thing or not do a thing or whatever based on something. Very, very common to use. If it's not true, then we're going to call stop. So for example, when we hit the trigger, we want everybody to stop. We want the sound to stop. So we're going to call this from the beginning and pass in true because that's going to be the game default behavior. So for the trigger, we're calling onStopTrigger when the trigger is triggered, and we pass in an optional agent. Optional agents just mean that it's the player, generally, that's going to be passed in, but something else could have triggered it. We don't know that, and it might not be the player, so that's why it's an optional with this question mark. It's just something you remember. It's always this way. And we're going to check to see if the crowd is stopped. So we actually need this variable defined, which we do up top here. So this is a variable and not a constant. So in my case, I use camel case. So it's capital I, capital C, capital S. Some people use underscores or all lowercase or something. And it's a logic value as well, set to false by default. So if the crowd is stopped is false, remember, we don't want to trigger this trigger if the crowd is stopped. They're already stopped. So we want to keep track of that. So is crowd stopped equals false. Then we set that to true so that we know the crowd has stopped. We play the cinematic, and then we spawn do toggle audio. And this is where we're going to toggle our audio file on and off. But we need to turn it back on, right? So we have to make it a suspends method because we need to do something later. That's why we spawn it. And this has to have a suspends in it. So it means that we can do a thing while other things are happening with a delay in the middle of it somewhere, or nothing. You don't have to put anything in. but we're going to play the crowd audio false, meaning that we're going to stop it. We're going to sleep for 8.1 seconds because my cinematic is 8 seconds long. And then we're going to play the crowd audio true. So that means it's going to play the audio again. And then we set is crowd stopped to false because the crowd is moving again. And this is all of the manager that we need. There's nothing that we really need to do more in here. And this is, if you're new to Verse, this is a good little file to get started with because we're learning about variables, you're putting in devices, you're setting off a trigger, which is very, very common, triggers, buttons, all to make things happen via the player. And we've got some audio playing, so this is really good. Very, very simple. But the next part is programming the NPC, so let's learn about that now. Okay, so back inside of UEFN, we're going to make a brand new file. So we'll go to our Verse Explorer, we'll right-click, add new Verse file to project, and we're going to pick NPC Behavior Basic. Now, these are all just templates. There's nothing special about these files. They just have boilerplate code in here, is what we call it, sort of default code. So we'll call this one, let's call this one custom crowd NPC, and it's a behavior. So we'll put behavior on the end and we'll create that. We'll save what's going on in here and then back over to Verse. So if we double click the custom crowd NPC behavior, you can see we have our boilerplate code. Just going to go ahead and delete the comments because I don't need them. That said though, the onBegin and onEnd are functions that run when the NPC is created and then when it's destroyed. So this is what we would use kind of like in our normal devices when a device is instantiated. And then onEnd is something you can do to clean up things that if your NPC has going on. So let's start coding out our NPC. The first thing that we're going to need to do is bring in some libraries. Now you may not know which libraries to bring in, but I know that I need these, and I find these things out when I'm coding up my code. So if we remove these and say, for example, I bring in one of my functions that requires it, you're going to see some squigglies under here. And it says, hey, did you forget to use this library here? And in this one, there is no identifier for original location. So first we'll grab that. And then it's going to say, hey, you need to figure out which library to use for the transform. So the libraries are things that you need in your code that pull other code in that you don't have to write. So in this case, we need the unrealengine.com one. We don't want to use the verse.org one. So we'll paste that in, and then we can grab this one and just copy here and paste this in as well. And that'll get rid of those squigglies. So that's something to think about. I'm just going to paste in all of the libraries that I know that I need. And let's get started coding this thing up and understanding why the NPC behavior is so cool. Okay, so if you remember, when we click our NPC device, we can see over here that we have an NPC behavior script override, and I put in the original one that I made. And then we've got these editables here. This is probably one of the most powerful things about NPCs is you can set up devices that they can look at or you can talk to the NPCs through them. So inside of the file, we're going to need to set those up. So we bring those in just the same as we did in our normal device, a stop trigger and a go trigger, and they're trigger devices. And then we just need to set up what they're going to do when triggered. Okay, so very, very simply, and as usual, we're going to set up the stop trigger triggered event, subscribe to that, and call on stop trigger. I've got the on go trigger one commented out for now, but I'm going to leave this code in for you guys in case you want to try it out. But essentially, I took away the timer that started things back up, and I had a trigger start things back up. But I actually preferred the timer, but I'll leave both in just so you guys can check that out. So let's write the on stop trigger code. So let's delete this code as well. We don't need that. And then we'll get on with sorting out the rest of how to make this NPC do its thing. Okay, so if we think about what this NPC needs to do, he needs to just wander around. And they don't, if they're wandering around by themselves, then we're not really controlling them. So I want to control where they go and how they go, because you can tell them to walk and you can tell them to run. You can apply a movement modifier, all kinds of stuff. But we just want to have them wander, locally to themselves, not too far. So we're going to set up their original location so we know where they started when they spawned, because onBegin runs when they spawn in. So we're going to call set origin point, which is done down here. Now the set origin point grabs the location of the NPC when they've spawned and just saves it. That's it. It's a transform, which means it's got the position, rotation, and scale inside of it. And we get that by grabbing these 4 items about now this is unique about the NPC character. So when we're going to grab the origin point, we need to get a bunch of stuff about the NPC. Primarily their fort character, because the fort character is what we get the transform. So we need the agent, which we just call get agent. And this is unique to the NPC behavior superclass. We can just get agent like this, and we'll grab the NPC. And then we want to grab their fort character. We don't need these two, but I like to put these in just in case I need them anyways, but we could delete these if we want to. And we want to check to make sure that this character is active. They haven't been spawned and killed immediately or something. And then we're going to set the original location to the transform of that character. That's a common way to get a player's location, NPC's location, is to grab the fort character and get the transform of it. So if we did get transform and then we did translation, that would be their XYZ, or rotation, and that would be their rotation. But of course we can't set that because it is set to be a transform, so the little red squiggly show up. But that's how we're going to get that. All right, so the next big function that we want to write is the start wandering function. I'm going to paste the whole thing in, and we're going to scroll our way up a little bit. And we need to get this is wandering value, which we don't have. So we're going to have to set that. When we set that up here, it's going to be false by default because they're not moving by default. And then if that's false, then we can set them to be wandering. Originally, I put a sleep in here, but I found that it wasn't really needed. So I'm just going to go ahead and delete that. So the next thing that we need to do is grab our interfaces, which of course starts with getting the agent and then the fort character, the focus interface, and the navigatable. Now, these things are going to make a lot more sense just shortly here, so don't worry about it. These are all things that you're just going to get. You can just write this almost as your own boilerplate code. So if all of this works out, then we can see if the character is active. It's really important actually to check if a character is active for a lot of things, because Verse has some weird failing problem for a long time that if it's not active and you try to do some stuff, then you could just crash, and it's really, really bad. So we're going to get some random values here, just a random float, which means anywhere between 0 and 500. We just need a number. We're going to get random X and random Y, because in this case, the NPCs are on flat ground. So we can just use the NPC's current Z location as it is. And we're going to see whether or not we want to make that a minus or a plus value for these, because we're going to then set the move to location of the bot plus or minus 500 in the X and plus or minus 500 in the Y. It's kind of a useful bit of functionality. It's not uncommon. You see it a lot when you want variable or random sort of movement out of a thing. This is a very, very basic way of doing that. And so since we now have this value, we can use the pos X plus rand X or rand Y, and whether it's multiplied by -1 or not will determine whether or not the original location, whether the original position of the NPC will have it added or subtracted from its current value. And then we say, okay, maintain focus on where you're going to go. We have to do this not for the first round, but for later, because we tell the NPC to look at the player when they stop, which is kind of creepy, right? But to reset that, we have to say, okay, well, maintain your focus on where you're going, so you look normal again, because there's no way to cancel it. So we have to tell it what to do. And then we set T for this target. And it's called a T to make it really short, but we're making a navigation target. If this seems confusing to you, please don't worry. These are literally just lines that you can write out, and this is exactly what they do. Make navigation target means you're going to tell the NPC where to go. And that is a vector 3. So it's XYZ. And we're saying move to X, move to Y, and then pause Z, which is the original position of the NPC. So he's not going to go up or down, right? We just want him to go X, Y, move minus 500 from this location or plus 500 from this location, somewhere in there, some random amount. And same with Y. So they sort of move quite randomly. And then we say navigate to point, colon equals NPC nav navigate to. So the navigation target is the place you want them to go. Navigate to tells them to go there. And then we have a movement type of walking. It's going to be walking or running. And it's that simple. You can tell them to walk or run to that place. Then we need to check to see if we've arrived. So we're going to run a loop and we're going to sleep 0.01. You could do less of a sleep if you really cared that much. But we really just want to say, hey, have you reached the point that I told you to get to? If so, set wandering to false, because remember, we're checking to see if it's false for this start wandering function to run, and then go wandering again, and then break, because we don't need to be inside of this loop anymore. So here's a neat little thing that you can learn. If you've never done one of these things, a loop just continuously runs and runs and runs until you call break. And it's very important to put a minor sleep in there. It could 0.1 or 0.01, something like that. And that's essentially just a delay of 0.1 of a second. And it says, hey, have we reached there? Have we reached there? Have we reached there? If so, then stop wandering and then start wandering and break out of this loop because we don't want to be in this loop anymore. We're going to break out of this whole function and it will get called again and create a new instance of that function and it just starts wandering again. So that's pretty cool. So that's how we're going to make them wander around. Now the trick to make them stop is to finally define this onStop trigger function we've had red squigglies for a little while now and in turn can't build. So onStop trigger, of course, is a trigger, so it gets an optional agent and we want to set is wandering false. I actually had checking to see if he's wandering or not, but we actually don't care. We don't care if he's wandering, so we can just take this out. And then we set it to false because he's stopped, should be stopped. And we're going to get all of our usual interface stuff. Then check if he's active. And then where is the nearest player? It's likely going to be us. So I have an interface that I use and use in any game. And this is very common. I found this on a tutorial somewhere. I thought this is perfect. It's exactly what I need. I wish I could link to that, but I can't remember where it is. So I'm just going to show you guys. And this NPC interface is just a normal creative device class. Nothing happens in on begin. Find nearest target. So essentially all we're doing is we're going through the whole play space. We're saying, hey, is there a player within 5,000 centimeters of who I'm checking with? So in this case, we're passing in our character, the NPC, this NPC, and we're saying, hey, give me back an agent. And then we tell the NPC to stop moving. So stop navigation is kind of like the opposite of navigate to. We stop them completely. And then we say, hey, focus on the player, which is what got passed in from our other method here, the NPC interface. It passes in the player, which is an optional player, because we might not find one. So then we get nothing. And then that just causes the NPC to focus on that. And then after a bit, we're going to restart wandering, which was, remember, the cinematic is 8 seconds long. So I've got 8 seconds in here. Restart wandering. Sleeps for 8 seconds because it's spawned, suspend its function, and then spawn, start wandering. So essentially, we're just going to restart moving around after 8 seconds. So this number here inside of the NPC and this number here have to kind of line up. And I've got it at 8.1 because I want the audio to start up just slightly after we come back to the player. And there's also actually a bug that you can't start up audio devices unless you're outside of a cinematic with verse. Don't know why. I've reported it to them. I think it's a bug. Maybe it's by design. Okay, so, and then we just need to define this NPC interface, which is this here. And we can do at the very top of this file like that. And that gets rid of all the squigglies and then we can build. And once we finish building, we can come back to UEFN and this will have the triggers that we need to do. Oh, I should also put in the go trigger, shouldn't I? Before we forget. And you guys might want it. Yeah, so the on-go trigger, if you were to use it, just starts wandering. And the other thing that I did, because I thought it was kind of important, is that as soon as they should start going, they should just maintain focus on themselves. So they'll kind of look down, and then when they have to go somewhere, they'll look up again. And I thought that was kind of cool. And we just call start wandering. So that's really simple as well. So yeah, back to UEFN, you can see we can set up our triggers in here. And then if we go to one of these NPC devices here, right now it's set up to have the stop on command NPC behavior. But if we open this up, we've also got our custom crowd NPC behavior. If we click that, we could then put in our triggers in here. So that's really powerful. I think this is a good starting place for you guys to get involved with NPCs. We're going to get into something a little bit more in the next tutorial, but hopefully this has helped quite a bit. If you have any questions, let me know anytime, and I will see you guys in the next one.